And welcome back to this week's edition of Meet the Media. This week, we want to put the spotlight on inaccurate reporting. Are journalists and editors a bunch of lazy people who do not check their facts properly? Or are mistakes rare and critics way too plentiful? I can see some of you on Twitter. What exactly happens? Please tweet us your thoughts right now. You can use the hashtag #MeetTheMedia, and that's where, of course, we will be able to engage you. But before we speak to Kevin Ritchie from The Star, a little bit of context to how we came to this particular topic. Remember the much punted phrase, a generally corrupt relationship? Well, that phrase is probably now about as South African as Chisanyama or Cook Sister. But it turned out, of course, that Judge Hilary Squires never used this phrase in his judgment against Shabir Shaik when he found the dude guilty of corruption. And yet many papers and senior journalists, including my good friend Karima Brown, had been using that phrase to describe that relationship between the then Deputy President Jacob Zuma and Shaik. But it was simply inaccurate legal reporting. And yet the story and the phrase grew legs, and it became a term that was accepted as fact. But of course, eventually the judge got fed up with the inaccurate reporting and wrote to a reporter at Business Day who then alerted his editor. And even then, some might say the editor was rather tardy in dealing with this inaccuracy, leading, I think, to some credibility being lost on the part of the media and, who knows, some reputational damage to JZ, if it's possible for us to damage him even more than he damages himself. A more recent example is perhaps the SARS debacle involving the Sunday Times, which not only dented the credibility of our biggest Sunday paper, but I think it also nearly ruined the careers of many of our top investigative journalists, and it certainly impacted our politics. But in that case, of course, journalists seem to be a pawn or pawns in political battles within the state. Do they allow themselves? What happens when there is a battle for control of state institutions? The Sunday Times itself published over 30 articles on the so-called SARS rogue unit. And on April the 6th this year, the paper admitted that they got a few of the facts wrong. And in a column, the paper's new editor, Bongani Sikoko, wrote, "The SARS story has given us an opportunity to take a closer look at news gathering and production processes. We have found some serious gaps." I mean, that's quite a concession from the editor. This stuff is sadly not restricted to the English press, by the way. I mean, way back in August of 2008, Media Monitoring Africa, and they do really good investigative work, released a report into crime reporting at Bild newspaper entitled "Crime According to Bild, Fear in Black and White." And what that report found by the MMA is that clearly the South Africa of Bild, dare I say it, is a very different place to the one that the rest of us live in. The report at the time showed that Bild newspaper failed to follow up on crime stories it reported on, and crucially, that its framing of stories that related to black victims of crimes was rather vague. And while the framing of white victims showed the events to be as a result of senseless violence, even if it later emerged that this wasn't the case, the follow-up never really gave you proper context. Essentially, Bild systematically misreported the facts about patterns of violent crime in this country, and I think that's the case of pandering to the worst fears of your readers, rather than simply sticking to accurate, balanced, evidence-informed statistics about crime, and making sure that you really are led by the story, rather than trying to merely sell newspapers. It undermines the reputation of journalists, it undermines our credibility and the role of the media in this country. And so it raises questions I want you to engage right now on Twitter. How does inaccurate reporting come about, do you think? How widespread is it? And what do you think should be done about it in the media? Remember to use the hashtag #MeetTheMedia. I'm now joined by Kevin Ritchie, the editor of The Star, to unpack these issues. Kev, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Eusebius.
There's already a tweet that I want us to talk about before we get to an example from your own newsroom of what has happened. And you can see, let's see whether we can get it up there from my team. Eusebius asking whether journalists are anti-intellectual in terms of journalism. I saw one a little bit earlier that asked about deceptive headlines. Mistakes happen, Kevin. Share with us one that you had to deal with this year in the newsroom.
Sure. Okay. I mean, I think the biggest one is the story of Kamogelo Peterson. And this was the intersection of social media and, the Jurassic print media, so the multi-platform and how we moved from the one platform to the other. This was a story that was told in 70 tweets and was retweeted 40,000 times one Sunday afternoon in January this year. And we engaged with the story and we did everything that we thought was possible to publish it, and only once we'd published it the very next day, we found that the entire thing was a hoax. And what we did immediately was to fess up even more broadly and more openly than we'd actually run the story, and then go out on multi-platforms saying, listen, mea culpa, we have messed up really, really badly.
Yeah.
And I went on, because my responsibility as the editor of the newspaper, irrespective of who wrote it or who published it, it is the editor's responsibility.
The buck stops with you.
Absolutely.
And one of the quotes I saw from you, you actually said, listen, we have to fess up. We simply dropped the ball in terms of your quote, journalism 101.
Bottom line.
Why did you drop the ball with all your experience?
I think that it's a very good question.
As it were.
Because editing a newspaper is like captaining a submarine. There's 1,000,001 decisions that are made every single minute, every single hour. Ask Penny Sparrow, as an example, that was one tweet that destroyed her life. Had she been able to think, we're making decisions around social media, around what is being published on multi-platforms every single moment of the day, and we're looking at, is it balanced, is it fair, is it true? You're asking the issue around headlines. Headlines are written by a separate bunch of people, sub-editors, because, and they're also working against deadlines. The pages have got to drop. They've got to go to the printers at a certain time. None of this is an excuse, but rather as an explanation. None of us go out with an agenda. You know, there's an old British phrase that says, never bribe a journalist. But if you see what they do unbribed, why bother? And I think that sometimes, you know, it's like controlling the media. Everybody always says, or there are political parties that say, there's a media agenda. No, it's not. Sometimes it's systemic.
I thought one of the reasons why you guys made the mistake of running with that social media story of this person tweeting a heart-wrenching story is partly because in hard copy, in old media, Kevin, surely the temptation there is to say, you know what, everyone now lives digitally. How can we be sexy, speak to young people, tap into social media? But isn't the danger there that
I think that was a real issue, yeah.
Yeah, a story can go viral on Twitter, but you still have your own corroborating you need to do. For example, you said in one of your apologies for the story, you didn't even bother to call the police and find out.
We did call the police, but we couldn't get hold of them. Yeah, I remember the story started, just for the viewers, the story started to play according to this, it was Just Kuti, who wrote the piece, who wrote the series of tweets. And this was something that happened in Germiston. It was her sister, non-biological sister, who then was beaten up in Germiston and died in Pretoria in a hospital in Sunnyside. So we tried, but we didn't try hard enough. And that's the key issue. We did try, but we didn't try hard enough. And we take that on the chin. I can't speak about other newspapers.
Before we talk about what can be done about it, let's be honest about the consequences here, because a lot of people might think that you guys are glib. There was a tweet I saw just now, I don't know if we can get it back, saying that sometimes you are deliberate about the errors and you just don't take responsibility about it. Tell my viewers, however, what the consequences are for you, commercially, reputationally, or otherwise, when a mistake like that happens.
Two things. If you deny it, it's devastating, because integrity is like virginity. You can lose it once. If you do it properly, and you go out and you say mea culpa, but also you can only do it once, and you say, we made a mistake and we are very sorry about it and we are looking into this. You can turn that around, and that's what we did with this. You turn it around and your integrity, the vicious cycle, becomes a virtuous cycle almost within that time.
Empirical question. Are examples like the SARS rogue story, the misattribution to Hillary Squires, your own social media example of what you got wrong, are these isolated or are they examples of bad patterns of behavior?
It's a very good question. I can't speak for other newspapers, except to say to you on the Hillary Squires issue, you're spot on that Hillary Squires never said that. But the Supreme Court of Appeal did say that, and the Constitutional Court did find that there was a corrupt relationship. So we must be very careful about where the things are located. I think that journalists, first and foremost, are human beings, and they do make mistakes. And notwithstanding the efforts that we put in to make those mistakes, to eradicate those mistakes, we do make mistakes. Do doctors kill patients? Do pilots crash aircraft? Nobody jumps in and starts the engine and says, I'm going to crash a 747 today. but sometimes it happens.
We're going to have to bring you in for the last question to discuss it more fully. But maybe in 30 seconds, Kev, if you know these are mistakes that happen, what systems and checks and balances do you put in place? You've got enormous experience. How do we minimize the kinds of errors that we've looked at today in the newsroom?
Number one, it's not generic. Number two, you find out which individuals are making these mistakes. Is it a pattern? If it's a pattern, remedial action. If it's not a pattern, bring them forward. But everybody has to know within the newsroom that they are accountable for every dot and every comma.
Kevin, all the best, and thanks for the integrity of owning up when the mistakes happen. And of course, we don't praise you enough when things go right. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you very much, Eusebius.
That was Kevin Ritchie, the editor of The Star. And remember to tweet us at eNCA. You're with me, Eusebius McKaiser. This is Meet the Media. And in our final segment after the break, we'll look at photography. How do the photographs get chosen that you and I are fed by the media?